In this PiMPx video tutorial, we'll be looking at how to use Tune Analyze Live, also known as Auto Tune, which is a self-learning tuning feature for the PiMPx, PiMPxs, and PiMPxshift ECUs. So to start the process, you'll have your gauges viewable. Mine says not connected, as I'm not currently connected to a running engine, as the audio is horrible when you've got an engine running in the background. So to start the process, you go to this tab, Tune Analyze Live, and it'll show you your current VE table, and you should already have it set up where it idles pretty well manually. And if that's the case, you will want to lock out those cells so it does not change what you've already done during this tuning session for those cells you've already tuned. So as an example, say it idles at 800 RPM and 40 kPa. So you can right or left click and drag to highlight the cells around the idle area. Once you do that, you can then right click, go down here to lock selected cells, and you'll see it puts this dark border around these cells. So those are now locked out, and any time that you're driving and it's in this area, it is not going to make any changes as you've already manually set this where it idles the best. So now you want to go over to the Advanced Settings tab, and what you have here is the cell change resistance. So it's set to normal. Now when you first are starting this process, you'll want to set it to easy or very easy. And what this does is it makes changes quicker with less data. So it makes large sweeping changes in an effort to dial things in as quickly as possible. So you can set it to, like I said, easy or very easy. And then as you go through this process through multiple tuning sessions and you feel like it's really getting dialed in, but you want it to make small changes just to verify everything's where you want it to be, that's when you would move it to normal or hard or even very hard, depending on where you're at in this tuning process overall. So now you've got limits, authority limits, that changes the max and min that it can change a given cell. You can just leave them at the default values. So you've also got filters for minimum RPM, which means it won't change anything below 500 RPM. Fuel load is the map reading. Minimum coolant temp, so you see it's at 160. This is a good value as you don't want to be auto-tuning when the engine's still warming up, so when it's still got warm-up enrichment active. So leaving it at 160 is good, and then of course you got to make sure your engine is actually warmed up before you start this process, or else it won't make any changes until the engine gets to 160 degrees. Max RPM, of course, max fuel load. So this is, like say, if it's a boosted application, you might not want to tune it, above a certain boost pressure or something. There's also custom filters that you could set, for, say, you don't want to tune below a certain throttle position or above a certain throttle position, or anything you can come up with. So in order to start this process, you would simply click the Start Auto Tune button. And you see mine says offline because, again, I'm not connected to a running engine. Yours will not say that, but it will update over here that it is changing the table. And you should see, as you're running, you've got the little dot that follows around the RPM and load that your engine is currently running, and these cells will start to change colors. And if you go back to this tab, you will see the cell weighting and the cell change start to illuminate in these boxes, and it shows what cells are changing, how much they're changing, how much you're running in a given cell, therefore how much data is available for that cell, etc. So how this Tune Analyze Live works is it can only tune the cells that you're currently running in. So if you're running at 1700 RPM and 70 kPa, it's going to be changing this cell. And as the little dot, moves around within this particular cell, it's going to change this one a little bit, or this one a little, or this one, because the value it's running in at any given time is actually an average of all of the cells around this one as well as this one. So if you want to tune up here, for instance, you can't be running down here because it has no data up here. So what your goal here is to simply drive around. Now for the initial tuning sessions, you don't want to be going wide open throttle until things start to get dialed in. So just drive normally. Drive in stoplights, drive around the neighborhood, stop and go. Normal conditions, just drive the way you normally would. What you'll find is you end up driving within a pretty narrow range of cells that sort of start in the bottom left and go towards the upper right. So you're going to be in these sort of cells a lot, and you're not going to be really anywhere else. So once these cells seem to get dialed in pretty well, maybe after 10 minutes of driving or 15 minutes of driving, you're seeing some positive changes. The air-fuel ratio is getting into the range that we're after. Then you have to actually start driving abnormally in order to force the engine to run under conditions that it wouldn't typically run in, but it may run in odd conditions, whether it's a racing condition or an emergency situation or just a situation that isn't normal but also isn't completely impossible. So those sort of conditions would be like high load, low RPM. When are you flooring it at idle? Not very often, but you'll do it occasionally if you're trying to leave a stop sign or something and going up a hill. So you would want to sort of lug the engine down into the idle range for RPM, and then you'd floor the throttle, and the dot that shows where it's running is going to run up into these cells, and then as it accelerates, it's going to run over this direction. And you just kind of repeat that process with that dot kind of running in a pattern like this. And then once these cells here seem to be pretty dialed in, they've made good changes, air fuel's where you want it to be, then you'd lug it down to the next row and you can run up into these. And then you can do the same here. And then the other odd scenario for running that you wouldn't normally encounter, but you could encounter at some point, is high RPM low load, because it's not typical to be running at 4,500 RPM and just at a light throttle, but it could happen. So again, you'd, instead of running it up here and shifting, you just hold it in gear, part throttle, and it might be running along somewhere down here, and you'll run it over here, and then you can run it back down lightly, and then you can run it back up here. And you're just trying to cover all of these cells to give it some data so it can change so the values are correct and you get the proper air-fuel ratio. Now you don't have to run it clear up to 7,000. Once you start to get things dialed in, you'll see the pattern of where the cells are moving. Like you can see here, it's 56, 62, 66, 70. You can see they're climbing, so then you can just manually come in here and edit these cells after you're done with the auto-tune session, once you have some data for surrounding cells. So another thing you'll find is you can see how these cells here are a lighter green, which all that means is these numbers are smaller than the surrounding ones. You'll notice the biggest number is the bright red, the smaller numbers down here are the brightest blue, and everything else is a blend between blue and red. So these are a lighter green because this file was created while auto-tuning for a very short time, and the engine was again running into this bottom left to top right kind of narrow range of RPM and load. So when you see something like this, what that tells you is they've not been running up in here or up here at higher boost levels, or here at higher RPM and lower boost levels, but they have usable data here that can allow you to manually come in here and just change these values to something that looks like it would fit better with what's already been tuned. Now this is where the heat map, which is the color values of all the different cells, come into play. When you see reds right next to greens, you know that that needs to be smoothed out because there's no engine that would need a 15% jump in fuel with just a slight change in boost pressure. You can see how they're more smooth over here. There's a 3-point change, where here it's 25. So if you again left click and drag and select the cells you want to change, you can then use any of these buttons. These just go up a tenth at a time. Here you can subtract, say, 10 from all the cells. Here you can add 10 to all the cells or whatever. Here you can multiply the cells by a certain percentage. Like if you want to make them come down by 10%, you would put in 0.9, which is, you're multiplying by 0.9. And then you see these values come down. Or you want to make that go back up, you can go 1.1, so that now multiplies them by 1.1, which adds 10%. So we're back near where we started. Or the other neat feature is if you highlight these cells that are already tuned and go up here where they look like where you might want to finish, and then you hit these extrapolate buttons. So this one extrapolates horizontally, so it would change this direction left to right. This one extrapolates vertical, which is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to start with these values, end with these values, and it'll average these values in between. So if you hit the button, now you see that there's even spacing between all of those cells, and there's even spacing between all of these. Now when you check the heat map, you see there's no green going into red. It's a nice smooth transition. Now you can do that for all of these cells. You can go up, hit this button, and it smooths them out. You can also do it going down, or see how this value is small and all the ones around it are close to that high 80s to low 90s range. So you can grab it this way and extrapolate, and then you can go this way and extrapolate, and you see that now this value more closely fits what's all around it. If you want to change these values because it looks like this is too much fuel for what the engine wants, you can say grab these, bring it down, and go to wherever it looks like it might be a valid number that you've already changed and it runs good. Hit the button, it'll lower all those values. Now your heat map is starting to get better. So what are these red numbers versus these blue numbers? So when they're red, that means that they're smaller than they were at the starting point of this tuning session. Blue means they've gotten larger. So this is the cell that was 80 earlier. You see with all of the changes it's now 89.7, and you can see it shows the beginning value there. So it's blue because it's added fuel. Red again means it's removed fuel. So all of these cells where you've been driving would be changing red or blue depending on what direction they're changing. So the other things we can see in this little white window that pops up when you hold the mouse over a given cell. Hit count means how many times it's hit this cell So if you're driving and you're maintaining this cell value and you're just running in a single cell, that hit count will just start climbing. And the more hits you get for a given cell, the better off you are because you have more data for that particular cell. Hit weighting means how much is the ECU putting value into the data there. So if you have very little hit count, it's going to have a low weighting relative to other cells that have more hits. And then the target AFR is just what it says. It's what air-fuel ratio are you targeting for this particular cell, which that can be viewed in fuel settings, and then you go to AFR table 1 and it shows you what AFR you're targeting for different conditions. So once you've been driving around, if you're happy with the changes that are being made, the numbers are relatively smooth, you've got two options up here for how to kind of save the changes. So you see that again this pops up and kind of tells you what the buttons do. So this one actually flashes the changes to the ECU, which means it saves them into permanent memory on the ECU. This one applies the changes, so the engine will run on the changes that are being made, but it doesn't permanently store them. So if you only hit this button, you never hit this button, and then you drive around for a while and you get back home and you turn your key off, well, you just lost your settings because you didn't save the tune, you didn't save the changes to the ECU. All you did was go out, drive around, make some changes, improve things, and then never save them. So it will automatically apply them over time when you're driving around, but it never hurts to hit apply every now and then, hit save every now and then, just so you know that you're keeping track of that progress and you don't accidentally lose it because your laptop battery dies, for instance, or you stall the engine and you turn the key off and back on and you lose your progress. And then when you're done, it never hurts to, before you turn the key off, to go ahead and go to File, Save Tune As, and then save that tune as, Auto Tune 1 or whatever you want to call it that makes sense to you. So when you're done auto-tuning, before you turn the key off, you would just hit Stop Auto-Tune, and you've stopped. So you can see, because I manually changed some of these, we also have the cell changes starting to show up. Now we changed oddball cells, and like I said, normally you would be running in those cells, for instance, and kind of up into these cells. But what you don't want to be doing initially is running above 100% fuel load, which is right here, because that's boost. So if you have a boosted engine, you don't want to be running around in boost for these initial sessions, because you don't know if it's going to run lean up there or rich or whatever, because you don't have any data in the cells below to see how it's trending. Is it trending where it's adding fuel everywhere, or is it removing fuel everywhere, or is it a combination of both? So you need those trends to know, well, if it's running lean and it keeps adding fuel as I get close to boost, or maybe into a couple PSI of boost at part throttle or something, if you see that it's starting to run lean, you know that you need to come in here and manually highlight some cells in the boost area and maybe add 10%, because when it runs up here auto tuning and it runs rich is safe, lean is not. So you run it up here, it's running rich, it's 10.5 to 1 or something like that, and then auto tune leans it out to where you're targeting, which could be 11.5 to 1 or 12 to 1, depending on the boost pressure, like you'd see here, what you'd be targeting. It'll slowly lean it out, and that's perfectly safe. If you see it's running 13.5 to 1 under boost, that's bad. You don't want to just stay in it and wait for auto tune to add enough fuel, because you may not have enough time, because running lean will kill the engine over time. So you don't want to just stay in it. You're like, oh, auto tune will fix it over time. Well, it will fix it over time, but the engine might not allow you to run lean long enough for that to happen. So you want to always come in here and manually add fuel if you see that it's running lean when you start to roll into the boost. So I think that's pretty well covered everything we can cover with Tune Analyze Live. So we will shut this one down, and we'll have some more videos for you in the future.